So the morning talks that you've been hearing have been trying to kind of go under the surface, right, on particular things. We had Melissa talk about human dignity, and then Brett and Anthony talk about pedagogy, right, and the kind of deep assumptions that we have about pedagogy. What I'm going to do in this presentation is talk social theory, which can sound very abstract, but what social theory really is are the deep pictures that we have in our minds that we hold and convey about how social relationships are supposed to work. Now, when we Catholics talk social theory, we usually talk Catholic social teaching. And all of you probably know something about Catholic social teaching, and some of you, I think it's very clear, might be experts in Catholic social teaching. So what I want to do is actually unpack the core social theory that permeates and undergirds Catholic social teaching. Oftentimes when we talk about Catholic social teaching, we go immediately to issues. We immediately say, what does the Catholic Church say about X, or what does the Catholic Church say about Y, which is very important. But in fact, before we get to that, we need to understand that Catholicism is communicating a certain kind of social theory, a picture of social relationships and how those social relationships are going to work. I also want to resist the idea that Catholic social teaching is just about politics, or even worse, about voting, right? Oftentimes when we start thinking about Catholic social teaching, we think this is how the church can be active in the political sphere. But instead of starting with politics, I actually think we should start thinking about social relations in a much more earthy way. We should start thinking about them here, with the annoying coworker. Now, I had to steal this slide from my wife, because it got such a great reaction on Monday. And I think it can help us understand a little bit more deeply why it is we need to go beyond the idea of human dignity. Now, Melissa talked about the way in which, because your coworker is not a fly, you are not going to swat her or kill her. You might actually not undermine her in some kind of a social media way, or you might not go to the boss and undermine her, and you might say that would all undermine her dignity. But what I want us to think about is, how should you relate to the annoying coworker? What is the relationship that you should have with an annoying coworker? How do we work out that relationship? And I don't think you can solve that problem by just appealing to the coworker's dignity. I think you have to look beyond dignity, and you have to appeal to something else, which in this presentation I'm calling shared destiny. The idea that humans have a destiny, and that destiny is community, communion with one another. This is a way of talking about what people are for. Brett, I had this written in my notes even before Brett talked about it yesterday. And I did note during Brett's presentation that he didn't answer the question, what are people for, in the morning presentation. Now, when I came back for the afternoon, he said in the afternoon presentation, I didn't answer it in the morning. And I'm like, yes, you didn't. That's true. And he said, of course, the answer to that is God. Right? And of course, I teach theology at the Bishop's University in Washington, D.C., and so God is the right answer to that question. I understand. But I was looking at scripture this morning on my phone, and I read, if anyone says, I love God, but hates his annoying coworker, he is a liar. For whoever does not love an annoying coworker whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen, right? Sorry, I ad-libbed there, right? It's not a bad translation. So when we talk about being made for God, we have to help people see that that is not some kind of private, spiritualized relationship, particularly not a relationship that is only going to go on in some future life as opposed to something that is already going on right now. But most importantly, we don't want them to think about this as a solitary destiny, but rather as a destiny where they're called to communion. communion with God, and communion with one another. All of this requires us to reflect more deeply on where we are headed, what are people for, what the purpose of our lives actually is. And that's what I want to get into in this presentation. I want to argue, of course, that we are made for community. We are made for communion. We're made for one another. We're made for relationships with one another. But what does that mean? It's not an obvious thing. I mean, we say it all the time. Love your neighbor, be in relationship with one another, like we had the reading from Greg Boyle this morning, include people. Is that easy to do? Does it always happen? Who's against it? No one's against it. I mean, maybe there are people who are against it, but they're not in this room, right? We want to do it, but how we actually build those relationships is not obvious. And so Catholic social teaching will help us understand something about those social relations.